Welcome to a special edition of the Darden Admissions Podcast. I'm your host, Brett Twitty, and you are listening to a new episode. On this episode of the podcast, I'm excited to share a recent conversation from our ongoing Faculty Spotlight series, a series we call Office Hours, featuring Marc Ruggiano and Robert Phillips. Marc and Rob recently joined us to talk more about what Darden means by ethical artificial intelligence. I think you're really going to enjoy this conversation. And as always, if this conversation is helpful for you, please like this episode and subscribe to this podcast so you never miss an update. And remember, you can always check the episode description for links to Darden blogs, social channels, and more. And now, without further ado, here's our recent installment from our ongoing Faculty Spotlight series, a conversation with Marc Ruggiano and Rob Phillips. Welcome, everyone, to our latest installment of Office Hours. This is our ongoing Faculty Spotlight series where we talk with faculty about their research interests, things that they're working on, just to give you an idea of what the academic experience is like here at the Darden School of Business. I'm Brett Twitty, the host of these conversations, but also a member of the admissions committee here at Darden, and joined today by Robert Phillips and Marc Ruggiano to talk a little bit more about ethical AI here at Darden. We've gotten a question as we've gone through some of these sessions. We've talked about artificial intelligence here at Darden. People have been like, well, what does Darden mean by ethical AI? I'm hopeful over the course of this next hour or so, we'll get a bit closer to understanding exactly what we mean by that here at Darden. So Marc, would you mind introducing yourself? Tell us a little bit more about you and your background.
Absolutely. Thanks, Brett. And it's a pleasure to be here and to meet all and speak with all of you, and certainly to talk about this topic with my amazing colleague, Rob Phillips. Um, I'm Marc Ruggiano. I'm currently the founding director of the La Crosse Institute for Ethical AI in Business, which is based here at Darden and connects the UVA community around topics related to ethics and artificial intelligence. I've been at UVA since 2019, and prior to that, I spent about 2 decades in the corporate world in various capacities, intersecting with AI at every stop. And then prior to that, I flew planes in the Navy, and was a Darden grad from 1996. If anybody can even think back that far. So it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Marc. And I should note, Marc has been on Office Hours previously with Christoph Hertfer, where we talked about the healthcare initiative here at Darden. So Marc has his hands in many things here at Darden. Rob, tell us a little bit more about you and your background.
Yeah, hi. Happy to be here. Hi, everyone. So let me see. I suppose a lot of my journey started in undergraduate when I found myself. I was a marketing major to pay the bills and a philosophy minor. And so I would find myself intentionally saying roughly the same thing in seminars. And in the philosophy department, I was a fascist. And in the business school, I was some sort of lefty pinko communist. And that struck me as interesting just right away. So I started looking to explore some of the intersections between business and philosophy, business and ethics. And fortunately, the year I needed it, Darden started a PhD program specifically in business ethics. This would have been 1994, and I was the first graduate of that program. So I've sort of have Darden and UVA in the blood. Also sent a son through UVA, and my daughter-in-law as well. So a few touch points there.
All right. Well, Rob, thank you so much. And for folks who haven't joined for these conversations before, just going to give you a little bit of the structure of the conversation today. Today will be just a little bit different. So we're going to talk about the panelists' background, kind of what got them to Darden, what brought them to artificial intelligence as a subject area, discipline, ethics as a subject area and discipline. And then we're going to talk a lot about sort of practical considerations around ethics and AI, and kind of work through the value chain as we think about it here at Darden. If you do have questions as we go, please feel free to ask via the Q&A. I'm sure you may have questions about some of the things that we get into. And I always tell folks we can't get into all of the questions that we get through the Q&A, but we'll do our best to source a few. And as always, we are recording this conversation. We'll share out the recording on both our Vimeo channel as well as on our admissions podcast. So Marc, you mentioned that you've worked on AI at all different points in your career. What's interesting to you about artificial intelligence?
Well, I think artificial intelligence can mean a lot of different things to different people, and it's a topic area that draws on and draws in so many different threads that it's surprising to me that everybody can't find a way to connect what they're passionate about and what they're interested in with the topic. But I understand that right now, the media may be saturated, with talk about AI, and people may have AI fatigue. But for me, most aspects of AI are interesting, from the technology that is powering it, which has really enabled many of the breakthroughs that we've seen, in the last, let's say, decade, since 2016 or so. From that technology to how, as managers and leaders, we use it to the benefit of not just our business, but all the stakeholders that we need to consider. And then finally, how we think about doing all of those things in an ethical manner, so that our use of AI, our development of it, is responsible and beneficial to all of the individuals and to society as a whole. So my interest in it is pretty broad, which is how I ended up being the founding director of the Lacrosse Institute. So it's a fortunate coincidence, but those happen as a result of a lot of hard work and a lot of collaboration with great people here at Darden and across UVA. So I'm very fortunate to be able to do something I'm interested in every day, and I think that Darden is a great place, to figure out your purpose and what that intersection is for you. But we can maybe get into that later.
And Rob, how about for you? What's interesting to you about artificial intelligence?
Yeah, no, I think I'm sort of honor bound to admit at first that I just don't know very much about it. So it was strictly curiosity on my part. So Mark discussed his AI fatigue, and I can certainly see where that would come from. I wasn't sure at first. Is this going to be the next blockchain? Right? There was always the guy at the party who wanted to talk about Bitcoin and blockchain, and I got fatigued with that pretty quickly, I must confess. But with this one, at every cocktail party, at every dinner, everything, I was just more interested walking away with how people were using it, and just some of the creativity, and the sort of the open vistas. And so for me, it was a combination of just curiosity, the absence of fatigue, but also honestly, people, in other areas, I'm do a lot of editing work with the various journals and this kind of thing. Obviously, teaching, and people kept demanding policies. Right, my syllabus needs to have an AI policy, or our journal needs to have an AI policy, and I couldn't even come up with one that I found defensible on a contingent basis, right? Every one of them was just a straight coin flip as I tried to figure out what the policy should be. So I decided that I just needed to know more, right? And so that's where the Lacrosse Institute has been remarkably helpful. Is just sort of putting me in rooms like this, putting me in other rooms that we can talk about as we go forward, just to figure out what I don't know, just play around with it, and it has. So far, I am not fatigued. I will confess. I still, every morning I wake up, wondering what I'm going to learn from Claude today.
That's super interesting. Policy pieces. We had a conversation with Jared Harris, strategy faculty member, who brought a lot of AI tools into his strategy course this past year across the various programs, full time as well as executive MBA program. And one of the things he talked about is this tension between needing people to learn the fundamentals, right? You have to understand the technical knowledge to be able to judge the information that's coming back to you. But you also want people to feel empowered to use these tools because they can be really such a boon to learning. And how does this technology complement, not replace the learning? I think that's challenging when you think about it from a policy standpoint.
Yes, indeed. So, yeah, and the learning is one of those strange things I've also found, where generally prior technologies, like I did go to the trouble at UVA of learning HTML, right? It was a fairly straightforward code. It wasn't terribly complicated, I admit. But when you're talking about computer aided design, lots of the new technologies did require some level of certification, some level of the real dig. The fact that this is just the chat element of a chat GPT. made it so that, just if you could speak a language, any language, English helps, but if you could speak any language, you can make this tool work. And that's one big difference with this one, I think, in terms of the barriers to entry just to learn how to use it.
Yeah, Mark, you mentioned the Lacrosse Institute. You want to talk a little bit more about the Lacrosse Institute and kind of what y'all are up to these days?
Yeah, sure, sure. The Lacrosse Institute, for folks that haven't heard about it, is one of the several institutes and centers at Darden, and there's great information about all of them, including the Lacrosse Institute on the Darden website. But the Lacrosse Institute was launched in September of 2024. And our focus is on ethical AI, and we support a number of different initiatives at Darden and across the University of Virginia. One of those is academic research, and so Rob is a great example of the collaboration between our amazing scholars here at Darden, like Rob, and the institute. We award research grants for research teams led by our faculty that are pursuing AI research in various topics. And so one of our focus areas is to help those research teams with their work, to support them financially with connections across the university and with connections outside of UVA completely in industry, in other academic institutions, et cetera. So that's one big area of focus, is supporting AI research. A second is supporting Darden students and the teachers, the faculty that lead and that create those classes and lead them throughout the 2-year journey in the residential program, and the equivalent in part-time and executive. And so we help instructors create courses. We help them create AI powered tools like the one that Brett mentioned in strategy with Jared Harris, um, and some others. And we help create cases, which of course is the heart of the Darden classroom experience, that is now about AI and using AI. And then finally, we endeavor to bring the community together. So not just students, not just faculty, not just our alumni, but all of those and more. We have an annual conference about AI. We have a number of smaller get-togethers throughout the year, and we're starting to expand those throughout the country, and not or and before long, in other parts of the world as well. So we do more and more in the DC metro area. This summer, we'll be hosting a get-together on the West Coast in Silicon Valley, and so our footprint and our reach, is growing as the institute matures. Um, so that's a quick overview. I'm happy to dig into any more of those parts as we go through this call.
Rob, your name was mentioned around sort of research related to AI. Can you tell us maybe about something you're working on that relates to AI, that or a project that's been on your mind?
Yeah, sure. So, as part of the lacrosse assistance, so we assembled a team. It's myself and a couple of the Darden PhD students, one of whom, actually, Skylar Clark Hamill, is currently presenting work about AI and stakeholder theory at University College London. Like this morning, I got a text from him, sort of reporting out on how that went. So that was beneficial. And then the other senior member of our team is David Danks. He joined UVA back in January from University of California at San Diego, and is a world-renowned expert on AI and ethics. And so we are currently, it's fun just to, it's a community, right? We have now a place to put people that we just want to talk to and hear from. So we have we're talking with a gentleman who, MBA alum who wants to help, do some research. He has data. His organization has some data that they're willing to share with us. So, we're not exactly sure. Apropos of my earlier comment, I don't know where this is going precisely quite yet, but I do know that it's a good opportunity. And the one that I suppose I'm personally excited about is, and that I suppose we'll come back to, is I would love. This is a bit of vaporware. I will just share that with you. This is an aspiration that we have that is sort of still in the lab, but we would like to get some of the people who are discussing how to make AI more ethical at places like Anthropic, bring them in and talk about, because these people are trained as philosophers, right? So it would be interesting just to hear how they think about developing the models and with some kind of a constitution, as they call it at Anthropic, right? And I've heard people analogize this to raising a child and what you would want to do from a moral philosophical perspective to raise children. So this is a conversation that I'm hoping that we can find a place for. But again, I don't want to overpromise, although that is, of course, the tech way, isn't it?
Well, well, Rob, the point about sort of AI having a constitution or an ethical framework is interesting because there's at least some commentary that people don't quite know exactly what the AI is doing, right? And so it can be mysterious at times. So how do you think about building a ethical framework or a moral code for such a technology?
Yeah, I think my first move is to ask the experts who have been thinking about this a lot more than I have. Honestly, there's a, but one thing that I think we all share a bit of concern with is that black box nature of some of the outputs. Right, that I would harken back to. I think it's a version of the autonomous vehicle conversations that we were having about, how do we attribute responsibility as between those people writing the algorithms that tell you whether or not to, harm yourself or harm people on the sidewalk, just what the automatic default positions are, and I don't think that conversation has reached a robust conclusion yet. But this one is even a next level problem, I would say. Some of the models where even the people who created it don't know what it might do or why it might do it. And so the one that I come back to pretty frequently is, what would it take for you to try if an AI disagreed with your physician about a diagnosis and a direction for your treatment? Which one would you trust? What would it take for you to trust the bot before you trust your own physician? And then extrapolate that kind, because I think that's an experience that we can all kind of relate to, but then extrapolate that kind of decision to your own workplaces, right? Within your own industries. What would it take for you to just, throw up your hands and trust whatever the robot says? And just as importantly, would you put your name on it? So I've long been struck back in the days of Sarbanes-Oxley, when one of the requirements was that the CEO had to sign off on all of the financial statements. And there was an uproar, as if the CEO was not already responsible for what it said in these filings, right? And so to me, it would be interesting, what would it take for you to personally take responsibility for the output here? In my own work, we're trying to deal with what it would look like for scholars, right? How do we explain the collaboration that we have with AI, with some of our paper writing, some of the analysis that goes into those papers? Because once you put your name on a paper, it's yours, right? That's the same in school as it is in academia. And are we being overly trusting of those outputs? Because we do know that there can be hallucinations. And I think that that would be embarrassing, to have your name on a paper where the bibliography is completely fictional, right? The papers don't even exist that you're relying on nominally anyway. So I think that both the who's responsible for the output, and what would it take for us as individuals to assume that responsibility, and then how do we think about the what some have called the responsibility gap, is a term that you'll hear come up there, and that is, I think, unresolved as of now. So continue, watch this space kind of story.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Mark, trust in this particular industry seems to function in a lot of different directions, right? There's trust of the models. There's trust of the people who are designing the models. There's also trust of these CEOs, right? We are aware of the CEOs of these organizations in a way that we may not know CEOs of other companies. What do you make about this trust conversation related to AI?
Yeah, sure. Well, and this question, right? How what role trust plays in individuals' ability and willingness to use AI, uh, whether that use is beneficial for them, for the organization that they are a part of, for community and society. A lot of those questions, relate back, at least in part, to this questions around trust. And there's a lot of great work going on at Darden, around trust and its connection to AI and to other things as well. And some of our faculty are doing a great job, sort of thinking about researching and teaching in their classrooms, about that topic. Uh, I think trust, comes from a couple of places, a couple of sources, and as it relates to AI, developers of AI, implementers of AI, users of it, and managers with responsibility for it all need to think about these things. But in a really straightforward way, I think trust occurs when things happen correctly, right? When the right thing happens, um, that that's not enough, though. Trust requires that things happen correctly, but also that the right things happen, right? And so what we say is, to be trustable or trusted, you need to do things right, and you need to do the right thing. And so those two components are hard to evaluate in AI, right? When your conversation with ChatGPT or Claude, or the tool you've built that connects through an API to either of those, or numerous others. And then the third thing, and I think this is where the people angle, the management, the leadership angles come in, is those two things, doing things right and doing the right thing, um, are by themselves, important but not sufficient. The third is, those things need to happen proactively, and so organizations, leaders, and managers, need to be transparent, need to be communicative. The risks, the failures, and what's being done about those, all need to be out there, so that people know that organizations are working and their leaders are pursuing, doing the right thing and doing things right proactively. And I think those three things add up to trust. And trust is essential, as I said, along the whole value chain of AI for it to be ethical.
Rob, your comments made me think a lot about the question of responsibility, which has started to be tested in a legal setting for these technologies. How responsible is it for the advice that it's giving, what it's telling people to do? Who bears responsibility for that? The company's ultimately responsible. You're starting to see lawsuits related to these kinds of things. How do you think about that notion of responsibility in the setting?
Yeah. I'll speak to what I take to be the biggest challenges to responsibility, and so I will say that that the diffusion of responsibility is perhaps the signal problem of business ethics. Right? We understand a decent bit about how to hold individuals responsible, even though there's complexities and complications there as well. But I recall, if you'll bear with me for a moment, there's this whole thing about the value chain that I know you wanted to get to here in just a minute, and I started thinking about value chain. So I'm sitting in my office back in 1999, and some stakeholders, some students, and some other groups had gone in and occupied the university president's office, demanding that nothing that's made under sweatshop conditions have the university's name on it. And at the time, Nike, the sort of target of this, was saying, "Look, we're a design and marketing firm. We don't actually make any shoes." right? And so the question was, to what extent is the university responsible for one of its licensees, subcontractors, employees treatment? And it's not us any more so than, is Marc responsible because he's wearing a UVA logo for how that shirt was made? And that just struck me as remarkable, even at the time. That's been now 26, 27 years ago, that companies were being and organizations were being held responsible for the behaviors of what looked like distinct remote organizations. And so I've been studying this for, almost 30 years. And I think that the AI story is just another example of that, right? So in addition to the black box issues that I was talking about a moment ago, the economy is entirely now networked, right? It's hard to say sort of, you have people in your own organizations who are, their paycheck comes from a different company, but they're there every day and they've been there every day for 20 years. They just don't happen to be UVA employees directly anyway. And so we're seeing more and more about the sort of upstream concerns with AI, right? So I think that I harken back to they say that the best way to make money during the gold rush was to sell picks and shovels and Levi's jeans to the actual miners out there, and that feels a little bit like what's going on now with some of our AI, right? Who was doing the supply? Everybody's heard of AMD, everybody's heard of NVIDIA, right? But there's a lot of up and downstream considerations with I guess Twilio. Datadog was all over this morning. I don't actually know what they do, but this is just one of those stories of the other organizations that are now joining the supply chain. I guess I'm also struck by maybe you guys saw the Allbirds story, right? Where now this sort of shoe company is now in the AI, and all they did was announce this, and their market cap went from 21 million to 148 million in one day, because now they just are AI birds or something like this. So I do think that just thinking about the ethics within this diffused supply chain, up and downstream, both the suppliers as well as the downstream specializers and adopters and API creators, those sorts of things. I don't think that was an answer. If I had an answer, I would have written that down and thrown that over the wall. But these are just some of the things that I suppose I'm thinking about is, how responsible am I when I choose a vendor for what that vendor is doing around my own AI? I mean, I suppose it's a little too soon to start talking about Canvas as one of our suppliers, but this is a hot topic around universities this morning. I think it's safe to say. So, universities are on the hook for Canvas's infrastructure security. So that's just, again, a couple of hot topics, just examples. If we did this tomorrow, I would have 4 more examples of responsibilities up and down those value chains.
Yeah, and there's well, add one thing, which is a little bit of a plug, but an interesting context to explore some of this. Rob, tell me if you disagree. Is a fiction work from a UVA English professor named Bruce Holsinger, who recently released a book called Culpability, which, without spoiling it for you, digs into some questions about responsibility, like the ones that Rob just brought up. And if you're looking for something to read that's fun and enjoyable to read and makes you think about AI and some of the issues Rob brought up over the next couple to read over the next couple months, I'd say check it out. But yeah, Culpability by Bruce Holsinger. It's a great read and a thought provoking one too.
Marc, I'm going to come back to you with this next question. Talk to us about how Darden thinks about the AI value chain. And it's been mentioned a little bit. So first, what is a value chain? And then how does Darden think about the AI value chain?
Yeah, sure. So, value chain, as Rob mentioned, and I think we've touched on, the value chain concept is not new, and most people attribute it to Michael Porter, who created it as a way for individual companies to think about, the activities that they performed that added the most value in the eyes, in the minds, and in the wallets of the customer. And so, that is now, a foundational concept and way of thinking about things in business. And as we were thinking about and for a while struggling with, how to get our arms around all of the things that are happening related to AI, right? All of the companies, some of which, Rob mentioned a few names, but there are thousands of names if you look at Illumascape of all of the companies, right? How do we organize them? How do we think about their contributions? And to our ultimate purpose, how do they contribute to our understanding and our management of ethics in an AI context? And so we took the value chain concept, and we created one that represents the AI ecosystem, and it starts with infrastructure, right? Which is the data centers, all the things that are required, to have a data center, like power, like water, and other natural resources, like connectivity, networking, and other things from the outside. And then all the things that go in data centers, right? The chips, the interconnects, the storage, the racks, the cooling, the et cetera, right? All of those are part of infrastructure, which is roughly a $500 billion industry by itself here today. But that's the first step. The second one is around data, what we measure, the data that is generated, and all of the questions and all of the activities related to making that data available, usable, and beneficial when you're building or using AI. The third stage is around the algorithms, the models, and the training. Brett asked about constitutional AI, which is an approach from, I think, roughly 2020 or 2021. And there are, numerous others. And, what algorithms you choose influence how interpretable and how visible the models are that you build, and how you train them, has a lot of impact as well. The fourth which is the next to last stage, is around the applications we build with AI and how we implement those in an organization. How we take a tool, incorporate it into a workflow, provide the users of that tool and the people in that workflow with the knowledge and training and guidance and guardrails to use those tools, those AI tools, effectively and safely. And then finally, the last step is management, how we manage AI applications, AI activities, and how we monitor the outcomes, not the outputs of the model, but the outcomes that are produced by the whole value chain, to ensure that they're aligned and beneficial. And then all of that, of course, it rides on and relies on people. And so everything from individual employees to organizations such as companies, to communities, and to society as a whole, right? All of those things together are the value chain of ethical AI. And when we think about those, and when we consider the ethics related issues and questions across all of those, all five of the stages, and think through people and other stakeholders that are involved, when we do that, then we're talking about ethical AI as an outcome of addressing considerations and thinking about these questions from various stakeholders' perspectives, throughout the value chain. That's ethical AI.
Thank you so much, Marc, for walking through that. Rob, I'm going to come to you with the question about sort of government regulation. So this is obviously a big conversation here in the United States now. Previous administration had one perspective on it. Current administration has another. But there's always, with these kind of emerging technologies, I think a bigger sort of meta question is, do we actually have the capacity to regulate these tools and technologies because they move so fast? So, do you think the guardrails around AI are likely to come from the government or more from the companies themselves choosing how to operate?
Yeah, it's a this keeps coming up now, doesn't it? We've been through that phase when we were now in a sort of borderless world, and governments were being de-emphasized, and having moved just to Canada and back. Anyone who hasn't ever tried to move country, anyone who has tried can tell you that we're not in a borderless world, right? That a lot of that was sort of overblown, and that was, of course, before the state started reinserting itself in various places. So my first instinct is to ask, what is the government? We talk about, can the government regulate and provide guardrails? But the truth is that there's this constant negotiation going on with between governments, right? It's hard to say who even the government is. In this instance, I assume we're generally talking about the United States government, but that doesn't see. And so the other negotiation that's constantly going on is between the companies and all the governments to which they are subject, right? And so you hear a lot about the self-regulation is can we regulate ourselves just enough to keep governments out of our business and keep some of those sort of regulatory reporting costs and so forth at a relative minimum. So I certainly think that governments around the world will have a role to play around national security issues, right? Around not just internet security, but all the kinds of security with various sorts of key infrastructure, airports, hospitals, power production and transmission and distribution, and this is also one of the things, by the way, sort of put in a plug for David Danks, whom I mentioned earlier. He has done some work around national security roles in the sort of physical, sort of kinetic war kinds of security, in addition to the internet or information security itself. So again, I'm sort of looking for historical analogs, historical antecedents to some of this, and I just don't know yet whether or not something like, and I still don't know why mythos was something that needed to be withheld, right? I just don't know enough about why it is apparently more dangerous than the rest of the LLMs that Anthropic has offered. But what I do, I've been trying to think of historical analogs, and I suppose nuclear power is one that it does seem like there's a something like an international agreement on who gets fissile material and when and in what degrees. So I would say that there are cases where government has played a more substantial role, but by and large, once these genies are out of their respective bottles, efforts other than that one, efforts to try to keep these things contained have been challenging, to say the least. And so as usual, I don't know. I'll keep coming back to that one. But it does feel like the government is at least paying attention. The governments are paying attention to what's going on here, and whether or not they know what they're looking at any more so than some of the designers know, are able to explain what we're all looking at. Probably circles back to what Marc was saying about does it work, right? Is this doing the job? Are the outcomes what we want them to be, and are the side effects relatively minimized? And then have some sort of governing authority step in and try to minimize those at least negative externalities, hopefully before any irreparable damage is done.
Mhm, mhm. And we see a bunch of efforts around the world, right, to for governments to provide guidance. Some strong and strict, and other efforts looser and more sort of direction setting. And so I think how we handle it here in the U.S. Will reflect our decisions and our trade-offs, um, both socially, politically, economically, et cetera. But as Rob pointed out, we are so interconnected, uh, in all of those ways that I think we also need to understand and take into account, what Europe is doing, what China's doing, and what other countries and regions are doing. It's definitely a complex situation.
And it is interesting
Inter-
watching different governments try different things, right? I go back to sort of the digital rights management laws that we see over in the EU, right? That's clearly a different approach than other countries have taken. The other analog that I think is worth considering is the genetically modified foods. That was one that came up. It was a fairly big deal. Flash in the pan, some would say, but whether or not we need to sort of keep these things on the shelf until we prove they're safe, or put them in the field and then see what's safe.
yeah.
And that would be another sort of just do a hunt and search AI for GMO, and see how much the conversations run parallel or track each other.
Yeah.
The nuclear point is interesting to me because the leaders of these companies, so certainly the prominent ones, talk about this almost like a Manhattan Project, right? So, the scale, the potential impact of this technology, and also the overlay of national security considerations is seemingly always present when you're talking about this as a race between various countries to be dominant. You hear that. One of the other conversations that's particularly acute here in Virginia is around data centers. Marc, when you think about this from an ethical standpoint, I mean, it's in Northern Virginia, it's a very hot topic up here. A lot of not in my backyard conversations. When you think about this sort of data center conversation, what sort of ethical considerations come to mind?
Yeah, sure. I think it has to start with y- the fact that there are various perspectives that need to be considered and incorporated, into the conversation and into decisions, about data centers. And those include the communities, where the data centers are being built or being proposed. That's those people, those communities certainly are front and center, in any conversations. But it isn't just local considerations, because we have to think about all of the uses that take advantage of data centers wherever they're built. And we are all part of that type of decision. So how, when you use Netflix, do you think about the implications of the data center, where your movie is streaming from or your show is streaming from? When you scroll through your library of photos, do you think about how much power that scrolling and that trip down memory lane is taking in the data center, where that compute and those photos are stored? So all of us, in a sense, are stakeholders, even as a single community is really leading the the discussion around whether a data center or region full of data centers like Northern Virginia, um, are doing things in the best interests of everyone. And so I think the stakeholder perspective is one of them. I think a second one, Brett, is you have to. It's important that we understand the pace of change of the technology, and so what goes inside the data center is the real driver of how much power, how much water, how much land or space is required, and all of those components are rapidly changing. Chips are becoming more energy and heat efficient. Algorithms are using those chips that compute more effectively, more efficiently, and more judiciously. The way we train models, the way we provide additional data at inference, right? So the way we manage context, right? These are all things that are evolving incredibly quickly, and so making a point in time evaluation about, do we really need this data center? Is it worth, taking up more land, straining the power grid, consuming more water, or not, right? It's hard to make those judgments at any given point in time, but as leaders and managers, as policymakers, et cetera, we're forced to, right? We have to decide to approve a permit. We have to decide to invest, billions of dollars, or not in either of those cases. And so, while there are uncertainties about the technology, there are uncertainties about the implications in various stakeholders. We as managers and leaders have to make those choices. And I think Darden is a great place, um, to to practice, to learn, and to train, to make those types of decisions and take those factors into account.
Yeah, it's a fantastic. Wow. Basically, I'm just going to echo everything Mark just said, only with slightly different examples. So in the first case, I will say that the markets are good at efficiency. And so both the sort of the data processing parts, that like everything relating to trying to bring down the cost and energy intensiveness of these data centers, is the sorts of things that free markets are just historically good at. So there is some cause for optimism around that. With that said, I would also with the how much energy is being soaked up is clearly front of mind for a lot of people in the data center conversation. I would also add another value chain implication, up and downstream, right? So the upstream implication is that for whatever reason, Mother Nature seemed to have put a lot of the rare earth minerals necessary for this process under spaces that don't have the best functioning governments, right? So that sort of brings some of our conversation together. Is what are the human rights implications for some of the artisanal mining around some of these rare earth minerals. It's very, very difficult conversation that a lot of my colleagues are sort of doing on-site research on. So we have to pay attention not only to the environmental considerations but also the human rights considerations, and then of course the downstream. What do we do with these things when they've run their useful life? Right. And so on the one hand, there may be some general redeployability of the bandwidth. So it's my understanding that a lot of the sort of crypto mining is being retasked for AI kinds of uses, and it looks like that's not a big leap. Apparently, there's some somewhat different chip design, as I understand it. I don't want to overstate my expertise in this area, but there has been some redeployment without having to throw all of these things, into a dump somewhere, because that will be at the end of the useful life of these, enormous, this push for data centers. There will be some artifact technology, and what do we do about what some people have called the reverse supply chain, right? Are we thinking as we build these things about how we might deconstruct them at the end of their useful life? This is something that you might have heard, like William McDonough and others talk about, sort of a circle rather than a linear production process. So if you build these things at the front end such that they can be deconstructed, waste equals food is their mantra, right? That in natural processes, everything's waste is something else's food. Right. So when we have the waste that comes out of some of these data centers, and however long, have we designed them in such a way that they just go sort of pile up somewhere in a vault in Nevada, or will we be able to sort of take these things back apart or redeploy them in some productive way? So that's the sorts of things that I wouldn't mind, the good people of the Commonwealth of Virginia putting some thought into as we sort of do the gold rush for data centers.
Yeah, it's interesting also to think about, I mean, some discussion around systemic risk with all the financial investment in data centers and some of the models of the companies that are building these data centers. Also, just general sort of opportunity cost considerations around all the money that is flowing towards AI versus other things. Mark, how do you think about some of the financial dimensions of this?
I think that we're still at a point where the jury is out on, are we overinvested or overinvesting in AI related capabilities, technologies, et cetera. I think one way to look at it is there's still a very active um, set of investors and potential investors who are evaluating these opportunities and continuing to put capital into these sectors. And so the market itself, as Rob said, right now seems to think that we aren't over invested. I think that's one perspective. A second perspective is, can we handle it if we're wrong about that? And, can we manage the risk? Do we have the institutions? Do we have the leadership and other things, to deal with the problems if the answer is, yes, this is a bubble, we're overinvested, and lots of people are potentially going to lose a lot of money. And while I'm not an economist or a bank regulator, uh, obviously, I think experts would say that compared to previous financial crises, our federal government, the U.S. federal government, still has far more capacity to address financial challenges than would be necessary. So if you go back to 2008 and the actions that the federal government took here in the United States with the banking crisis, then the scale of those interventions, if you look at assets on the Fed books, for example, are still much higher than what would be required, to bail out all of the investors in, data centers and chips and other things collectively. So, I would also say that when the markets are still positive, we still seem to have the capability, the capacity, to handle a worst case scenario. But I don't know how long either of those things are going to last. And so, the enthusiasm may wane. We may get to a point where, we are looking at something too big to fail, as the saying goes. But right now, I'm still positive about it. And I'm sure there are other perspectives that aren't captured in what I just said.
Yeah, it's. I would say that that half of what we know is wrong. We just don't know which half, and
Yeah.
and so it's. Well, I'll throw in very quickly. One way to measure systemic risk, I find that insurance company, like insurance underwriters, are good at this. Your money where your mouth is, kind of thing, and to a slightly lesser extent, investors also. And so I just wanted to highlight a couple of things that I'm monitoring. We'll see where they go. There are two cases around fiduciary duties for retirement plans. So there's one in Texas. It is Spence versus American Airlines, where there was a lawsuit saying that if you were considering ESG considerations, that was a violation of your fiduciary duty to sort of maximize investment returns. And that one's sort of working its way through the courts in Texas. There's a competing case. I think they're set up this way. Honestly, I don't. That's just me reading between the lines. But it's Quebec versus Cushman, and it alleges that to not consider ESG considerations in your investments is actually a violation of your fiduciary duties, given the systemic risk involved in sort of missing out on some of the environmental, social, and governmental considerations. And so to the extent that that those guys put their money where their mouth is with regard to systemic risk specifically, I'm just sort of monitoring those cases to see because it feels set up to force the Supreme Court to make a decision. It's one of those sort of relatively conservative districts. Versus a relatively progressive district, and so watch that space as well.
Yeah, also very interesting with the profitability questions around these companies, the burn rate, how they're spending capital. Some rumblings that who knows, we might need a bailout. And the passing comment that sort of got walked back. It's interesting to think about some of these things. I want to make sure we have a few minutes left. I want to talk about AI and the workforce, and we probably could have spent a whole conversation around this. But it reminds me of that railroad comment: "Who rides upon the rails ride upon us." That kind of thing. And sort of is that what we're looking at here, Mark? There's obviously a lot of conversations. You see companies now choosing to scale down the workforce by X% because they think AI can do that work. Difficult for folks who are starting their careers, looking for entry-level jobs, because a lot of this is now perhaps being automated or replaced by AI. How are you thinking about that sort of ethical piece when it comes to this?
Sure. And I'll start slightly differently and try to end up directly where your question was situated, Brett. And I know Rob probably has some thoughts on this question as well. But I think in many ways, the question of is AI taking jobs from people is a little bit of a misdirected question. And I think that AI may appear to be doing that. Executives, business leaders haven't helped because they have used AI as an excuse to take actions that, may, at least in part, be related to other forces and factors that are at play. So not all layoffs in the tech sector, for example, are because AI coding agents, are taking jobs from people. Um, and so, I think it's a bit of a misdirected question, but the concern definitely exists. And maybe some of the folks, maybe some of you on this webinar, have that concern. And so, while the question itself may be a little bit off target, is AI taking jobs? The concern and what we do about it is certainly paramount. And Darden is focused on making sure that, that the business education you get here is appropriate for the AI environment that our students are graduating into. And so I would answer the question this way, Brett. I would say, the best thing to do now and in the foreseeable future is to be as good at doing your job with AI at your side as you can possibly be. And, making up another scenario for the future and preparing for that scenario is not a better choice than doing what I just said, right? Use AI to be as good at your job as you possibly can. And you will adapt over time as, those demands and the capabilities and other things adapt. But we are passionate here at Darden and dedicated here at Darden, with the help of the Lacrosse Institute, in making AI a part of every educational experience that benefits from it. And that's not all of them, but it is a large number. And so we're really confident that our students are pursuing, or building toward, being as good as they possibly can at their job, using AI.
Yeah, I find myself saying that if AI can take your test, it can take your job. So, do with that what you will as a student. And I don't mean to sound cavalier, pardon the pun, about sort of the transitions between technologies, but we've run into this since the fictional Ned Ludd and the Luddites. Going around and busting up various sort of factory weaving facilities. John Henry sort of worked himself to death trying to beat the steam hammer. I think neither of those are going to be particularly useful historical analogs to look to. What we can do, going back to your question about the government, there is a role for government in sort of easing this transition with the various sorts of training that one might have to adapt to the new world. So I do think that there's a role for some of the central authorities to help us with that transition.
Yeah. And that, apropos of that, in my mind at least, we often ignore the opportunity that exists right alongside the threats. And I think the latest statistic, and I wish I could quote where it came from, but the latest statistic that I read is that 80% of the growth in employment since 1980 came from new jobs that didn't exist in 1980, right? And AI, whether it's happening already or not, AI is going to create a whole bunch of new or different jobs. And our reason for being is to help prepare you all, for that. And I think that's the most important takeaway in my mind about, is AI a threat to jobs, to the workforce, et cetera?
Super interesting to hear your perspectives on that. Mark, your comment about what CEOs may be saying, justifying the cuts that they're making or explaining the cuts, the sort of tension between narrative and reality and the extent to which people hear this and say, see, I told you this technology was going to have this kind of impact. And it's certainly not helped by that. But also, I had a conversation with Doug Thomas not so long ago. He made the same point about there will be a period of transition, but ultimately net job creation is what you would expect to see from a new technology like this. And so the other sort of point around government interventions is, can they be responsive enough? Can they come quickly enough to help ease that? I think oftentimes they've been a little slow, a little bit reactive, maybe even too late. There's a really fascinating book called Janesville, which is about Wisconsin community, manufacturing there, a GM plant closes down and people trying to reskill and all these kinds of things. But arguably, this is 2008 in the financial crisis. And arguably, a lot of those interventions come a little too late for many members of that community. So very interesting to think about. One last question for you, and I recognize we're right at time. If for folks who've got interest in these conversations, we talked about the Bruce Holsinger book, Culpability. Marc, is there another book you might recommend for folks who want to learn a little bit more about the sort of ethical questions of AI?
Absolutely. I'm gonna give you one of my favorites, which is an old one, and then a more recent one, if that's okay. One of my favorite books about AI, the book that introduced me to some of the thorny questions about AI, is an old book that is called I, Robot, written by Isaac Asimov. And you can watch the movie if you prefer, but I really would encourage you to go back and read the book. The stories, it's made up of short stories. Some of you may know. That were stitched together with an overarching, a narrative arc that Isaac Asimov created, and they raise all of the questions that we struggle with today, but in a fictional setting, and in a pretty entertaining, albeit dated, style. Another one that's the exact opposite of that I really like is called The Ethical Algorithm by Michael Kearns. And it's a good one to help you understand, that these aren't just conceptual conversations, that we need to have deeper conversations about how we actually make, some of these very good ideas happen in practice. And the ethical algorithm gets into how some of them work from an algorithmic perspective. So I'd suggest those two, Brett.
Excellent. Rob?
Yeah, so I wasn't going to suggest it until Marc said it, but Ian McEwan has a book called Machines Like Me that is pretty entertaining. But the other ones I was going to suggest are, what's your favorite historical analog to a technological revolution, and then go read a book about that revolution. So the two that I was thinking of were there's this famous, though fictional, case where Thomas Edison was. This part is real. Thomas Edison was in a big fight, a pretty ugly fight, with Westinghouse and Tesla, the original Nikola Tesla, that is, about direct current versus alternating current. The part that's fictional is that Edison shocked an elephant to death in order to prove how dangerous alternating current was. That part is apparently false, I've recently learned. But it is the case, apparently, that Edison lobbied to have AC used for executions, just to prove how dangerous this was, and it was going to be used to kill people, and actually lobbied to have an execution called being Westinghoused. Right. So just take a look and see, how people approach sort of electricity as a new technology. It just, and the corporate roles in those adoptions and what they did is just fascinating. And the other one, Brett, that thank you for recognizing. I think that the atomic pile at the University of Chicago. Right, they just put a bunch of this sort of nuclear material, and the scientists that there was a non-zero chance that it was going to extinguish all life in the universe. They didn't think so, right? They had some weird sort of safety things, including people sort of with other chemicals on top of this pile that they could just sort of drop and try to stop this meltdown from happening. So watching how people reacted to the nuclear age is reminiscent of some of the existential, catastrophic language that we hear right now. So the book that I will recommend, it's called The Maniac, by a guy named Benjamin Labatut. And it's largely about John von Neumann, who sort of has some claim to being one of the smartest guys of the 20th century. But it also, he went and did a lot of work at Los Alamos and during that time. So the book that I would recommend for that, as well as it's just a fascinatingly, well written, well structured book, The Maniac by Benjamin Labatut.
Excellent recommendations. There's a great book called Empires of Light, which is all about the competition between Tesla, Edison, and obviously Westinghouse as well, which is uh, that was a big, big, I guess, say power war. I guess how to describe it. Very interesting time. in
Yeah,
history.
sorry. I was going to recommend The Last Days of Night was the book I was going to recommend. And Graham Moore, Last Days of Night, is another sort of fictionalized version of the current wars, they called them.
That's right. Absolutely. Well, Marc, Rob, thank you so much for your time. It was a great conversation, and I'm sure we could have gone for another hour if we had the time. But thank you all, and to our attendees. We'll be back in early June with a conversation with Roy McDonald, who's a strategy professor here at the Darden School of Business. So hopefully we'll see you again for that next office hour session. Have a great rest of your day. Have a great weekend. Thank you all.
Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, everyone.
And that was the latest conversation from our ongoing Faculty Spotlight series, a series we call Office Hours, featuring Marc Ruggiano and Rob Phillips, two members of the Darden faculty. As always, if you have any comments, suggestions, requests, anything you'd like for us to cover here on the podcast, we're all ears. We can be reached at Darden, that's DARDEN, @virginia.edu. Until next time, stay safe, be well, and thanks for listening.